Since I made the video about poltergeist activity and telekinesis, I have been trying to refine my theory further. The link between electromagnetically anomalous environments and the poltergeist agent was not very complete. Similarly, the details of how poltergeist agents could influence objects with telekinesis was not very complete either. I will begin with the environmental link first. First of all, it has been demonstrated that exposure to a specific electromagnetic frequency disrupts the magnetic orientation ability of birds. It has also been demonstrated that radio waves at 1.260 MHz in the electron Lamore frequency can disrupt human volunteers' magnetic orientation ability. This suggests that both humans and birds have a magnetic orientation ability that uses a radical pair mechanism, which is being interfered with by specific electromagnetic frequencies. This is significant because a radical pair mechanism uses free radicals to achieve a biological quantum effect. Second, human CRY2 cryptochromes have been demonstrated to be magnetosensitive. When fruit flies are engineered to not have cryptochrome genes, they lose their magnetosensitivity. This sensitivity is restored when human CRY2 cryptochromes are introduced. This demonstrates a clear cause and effect. Third, pulsed electromagnetic frequencies modulate the production of free radicals in human cells, and this process requires cryptochromes to be present. Fourth, electromagnetic frequencies can cause repeated irregular gating of ion channels within the body. This disrupts electrochemical balance and homeostasis, leading to an overproduction of free radicals. This matters because continued exposure to electromagnetic frequencies that disrupt your ion channels can cause your body to overproduce free radicals. We know that modulation of free radicals requires the presence of cryptochrome, and that cryptochrome likely is giving humans magnetoreception ability through a radical pair mechanism which relies on free radicals. So it could be the case that when electromagnetic frequencies disrupt your ion channels, this causes your body to overproduce free radicals, making your body more sensitive to electromagnetic frequencies through the quantum effect that is the rapid pair mechanism. If this is true, then your body is more sensitive because it has a greater quantum effect from the increased amount of free radicals. This would potentially explain why electromagnetically anomalous environments can influence a person's body to the point at which they gain strong telekinetic power. This telekinetic power could then be wielded by the subconscious mind of a person who is prone to synchronistic brain activity like seizures and is also experiencing strong emotions or high stress. Since the brain itself is part of that quantum effect, then it would follow that the stressed subconscious can focus telekinetic power towards what it desires. Additionally, while cryptochromes are found throughout the body, they are found in higher concentrations within the brain. This brings us to part 2, how the mind influences objects with the process we call telekinesis. Typically, telekinesis is separated into two categories, macro and micro. Micro refers to very small influences like changing the outcome of coin flips or random number generators. Macro refers to more noticeable influences that can be observed with the naked eye, like paranormally bending metal and causing what are essentially small pinwheels to spin. I would suggest that you think of macro and micro as simply 2 points on a sliding scale of strong to weak influence. Telekinesis works well when things are random at the macroscopic level. Quantum entanglement works well when things are ordered at the quantum level. The connection is that telekinesis works by starting at the quantum level and is more noticeable in random macroscopic systems because they can amplify small influences. In comparison, highly ordered macroscopic systems attenuate coherent propagation of small influences with existing macroscopic noise. The effect of telekinesis tends to be weakened with distance and enclosed spaces surrounded by barriers. I am mentioning this specifically because this effect is most noticeable in beginners who haven't developed really strong telekinesis and are trying to influence pieces of paper or aluminum foil balanced on something sharp. If you are trying to achieve an outcome that only needs weaker telekinesis, like influencing a random number generator, then distance and enclosed spaces essentially have no negative effect. Every object already has quantum effects happening. However, these effects can't result in anything noticeable at the macroscopic level because the quantum level is not coherently organized towards a specific outcome, and the macroscopic level is generally too ordered because of consistent physical limitations like friction, inertia, and air resistance. It is difficult to overcome this kind of consistent limitation, but it can be done if telekinesis is strong enough. Quantum systems have strong interactions when their wave functions overlap. As the systems, human and target object, are separated by distance, the more your telekinesis interacts with the environment rather than the target object, increasing the noise-to-signal ratio and increasing decoherence. The result is a decrease in the coherent propagation of the wave function and the overlap of the two systems. The quantum entanglement itself does not weaken with distance. It's just that your telekinesis is focused in a location that is not right next to the target object. A similar thing happens when you introduce an enclosed barrier around the target object. The material of the barrier becomes a part of the environment which interferes with your telekinesis. This is why distance and enclosed spaces reduce the effects of relatively weak telekinesis. To reiterate, macroscopic order suppresses telekinesis by dampening weak signals. Random macroscopic signals increase the observable effect of telekinesis by amplifying weak signals. Additionally, it is flawed to assume that psychological barriers are the only significant limitation that prevents us from using telekinesis. We already know from Barry Taft's research that there are circumstances that are not purely psychological which cause people to become poltergeist agents with strong telekinetic ability. If electron clouds were shifted due to a quantum effect, this would create an induced dipole moment, meaning a separation of charge. The regions around the atoms can be separated into higher density regions which become more negative, while the lower density areas become more positive. As a result, the material can potentially become polarized if the dipoles align in the same direction and cause surface charge differences. Both Alla Vinogradova and Angelique Katin were able to create electric shocks. Whenever electric arcing occurs, this is evidence that there is a strong difference in potentials between 2 points. Again, if electron clouds are being shifted by a quantum influence, this mechanism could produce these results. Angelique Cotton had an exceptionally strong influence over silver objects. Silver is a highly conductive metal because it has a nearly free electron gas. An outer electron of the silver atom is delocalized. This means silver atoms can be affected to a greater degree because their free electrons can collectively oscillate and amplify the response. Nina Kulagina's telekinesis worked best through a dielectric screen. Both Nina Kulagina and Alla Vinogradova found that their telekinesis seemed to work better with non-conductive objects. A dielectric screen is a non-conductive dielectric material that is used to shape electric fields with polarization. However, just because a dielectric screen helps in this way does not necessarily mean that telekinesis is using a dielectric force. Rather, it means that telekinesis, in this context at least, must have an electrostatic or electromagnetic component. Dielectric materials have internal charges that become polarized and shift slightly to create dipoles that align with an electric field. In contrast to dielectric materials, conductive materials do not behave in the same manner because free charges simply move and redistribute themselves to align with the electric field. This redistribution cancels out any internal electric field in conductive materials because the charges can't polarize. Conductive substances are still influenced by dielectric forces, but they must use a different mechanism in order to get strong results. From this information, we can say that it is very likely that Nina Kulagina and Alla Vinogradova's telekinesis was using an electrostatic mechanism rather than a dynamic electromagnetic force. Additionally, if we observe that conductive materials like silver are more strongly affected by telekinesis, we can infer that it is probably a dynamic electromagnetic force rather than an electrostatic force. A quantum effect that shifts electron clouds can cause both electrostatic or electromagnetic effects depending on how it is applied. By alternating fields, the free electron gas of silver can collectively oscillate and produce a response far greater than a dielectric material could. This is called plasmonic behavior. This is probably why silver in particular was so strongly affected by Angelique Cotton's telekinesis. After I made my poltergeist video, I sent an email to Barry Taff and asked what his opinion was. He was very kind to take the time to watch the video, and he pointed out one thing that I failed to give a detailed explanation for. He stated that to move a 185-pound man without any physical assistance would generate incredible heat, yet there was no corresponding amount of heat witnessed. He then concludes that since work is being done without the generation of this kind of heat, there must be a violation of the laws of thermodynamics. Strictly speaking, heat in this context would only be generated from an inefficient transfer of energy, so there is no absolute necessity for a law of thermodynamics to be violated in order to get the result in question. An alternative explanation for this would be that the energy is being transferred with a very small degree of inefficiency that does not generate a perceptible amount of heat in the immediate location. We do know that quantized energy, the energy that is used in quantum states, is not constrained by the limitations of classical physics, and this is why quantum states are more efficient at transferring energy. It would be more reasonable to assume that a fairly efficient quantum mechanism was responsible for moving the man than to assume that a law of thermodynamics is being violated. I have provided an explanation for this effect that is compatible with my perspective and the evidence that I have. I want to make something clear, though. Other people can definitely be justified in deriving different explanations based on the evidence that they have. What is important is that at some point we try to test these theories to see if they can be proven correct, or if they need to be changed to better accommodate the evidence. The explanation I gave about quantum effects and efficiency only explains the lack of significant temperature change. We also need an explanation why temperature changes can occur as a result of paranormal effects. People like the physicist John Hasted have reported increases of heat in objects that are paranormally thrown in poltergeist cases. Others observe decreases in temperature as a result of paranormal activity. I will start with the assumption that telekinesis is compatible with the first law of thermodynamics, and for the sake of simplicity, I'll just be talking about changes in air temperature. Energy is not created or destroyed, but changes form. Starting with this assumption, we could say that the energy of the translational motion of air molecules is probably being transferred into another quantum system. The result is that the average kinetic energy of the molecule is decreased, causing the molecules to collide with each other less forcefully and generate less heat than they normally would produce from these collisions. A quantum system could absorb energy and decrease the speed of collisions between atoms or molecules, causing a decrease in temperature. It could also release energy and increase the collisions, causing an increase in temperature. In other words, the same quantum mechanism could achieve opposite results depending on how it is applied. A quantum effect would not work completely uniformly across a material. This is because materials are never completely uniform to begin with. Impurities, grain boundaries, and strains across a metal will be affected non-uniformly by a quantum effect. The paranormal hardening in this case is unlike the normal application of external forces because of the lack of uniform strain profile and the lack of uniform dislocation loop profile. Additionally, paranormal softening of metal occurs when telekinesis destabilizes grain boundaries. Ingo Swann was the person that created the remote viewing clairvoyance process for the U.S. government. He determined that there was a correlation between high solar activity and a large percentage of the days in which the remote viewers were doing worse at giving accurate information. Ingo wrote a proposal in which he suggested that time and money should be put towards investigating the subject further, but it was rejected because the conventional wisdom was that neither electromagnetism nor the sun could affect human or animal life at all. Thankfully, the connection between electromagnetism and human psychic ability reached the ears of Michael Persinger, and he was able to investigate more. His results pointed towards the conclusion that decreased geomagnetic activity correlates with easier telepathy and clairvoyance, while increased solar activity correlates with decreases in these abilities. A.P. Dubrov published a book that provides considerable evidence linking human psychic performance to electromagnetism and the sun. James R. Johnson and John Milley and Julieta Ramos have also published papers providing evidence that brainwave synchronization can be interfered with by electromagnetic influence. Let's circle back around to the point that I made before about how cryptochromes and quantum pair mechanisms are likely the mechanism that allows humans to use telekinesis. Remember, this process can be disrupted by electromagnetic effects, so it would obviously follow that decreases in geomagnetic activity means less electromagnetic disruption of the human psychic ability, and increases of solar activity provides more disruption of human psychic ability. This is a bit simplified, but I think this point is important. The reason why it's simplified is because there can be exceptions. For example, not that long ago I was using telekinesis on a psi wheel on a day with particularly high solar activity. I can't definitively say why the solar activity seemed to have no detrimental effect on my telekinesis, but I can hazard a guess. Some people who have near-death experiences develop psychic abilities as a result. We know that when a body loses the spark of life, nothing inherently special seems to occur purely in relation to the body itself. However, the soul or psyche of the person in question may continue to have conscious experience independent of the body, and this is quite special. This is special because it implies that it is not necessarily the case that the body creates consciousness. Rather, the soul or psyche interfaces with the body in daily life. It may be the case that the soul or psyche itself is changed somehow. If this is the case, the psychic power is not created within the body itself, but rather originates on the soul side of the equation. So we may think of limitations that affect the body side of the equation, like solar activity, as a barrier that could potentially be overcome by something on the soul side of the equation. Naturally, we tend to think of ourselves as our bodies, but I think it is more accurate to view ourselves as a kind of paranormal, discarnate force that controls a purely physical body. This shift in perspective helps us make more sense of why near-death experiences could lead to psychic abilities developing.